Members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. You know, the gentleman to my left needs no introduction. He, whom we view as the foremost authority on all matters related to energy. We're proud once again to work with our knowledge partner served by S&P Global. It's been 2 years since we started this conference series here in Kuala Lumpur, and I think there has been very clear, observable shifts on the conversations around oil, gas, and energy in general. And this evolution has been some expected, some unexpected, driven by macro environment shifts. We see growing advocacy for energy security. I mentioned in my opening address, this is now front and center again, but equally matched with louder calls for responsible energy addition and production. It'll be hard to imagine that these topics being well received in this day and age, but I think as responsible parts of an energy system, we need to have these honest conversations. The general sentiment has been we should sway according to the needs and even headlines with time, but I think, as I've mentioned in other platforms, there needs to be a growing realization that energy investments cut through changes in government, shifts in policy, and capital is deployed to serve the needs of energy security over a longer time frame. That's why we believe, and continue to believe, Energy Asia is a crucial platform. We've managed to gather leaders from not only IOCs and NOCs like ourselves, but also power and utilities, policy makers, institutions are coming together to share their imperatives. There has been probably across the spectrum either a technology-led or a pragmatic-led conversation on these things, but as we mentioned over the course of yesterday and today, we can expect that more than ever, the question of meeting demand, whether your view is that peak oil is coming or it's further out, the challenges to supply, given the very obvious shifts in the operating environment and what's manifested itself over the last 3 to 5 days. There's no doubt energy will be a part of continuing human development, but what we've gathered in the last 6 months, especially for an emerging and developing economy such as Malaysia, we need to build strong foundations. It was just announced today that Malaysia has continued to improve on the World Competitiveness Ranking for 2025, but equally, Dan yesterday was looking wide-eyed, and so was I when our contemporaries were announcing that the shifted demand, electricity demand, was going to move by about 6.5%. Obviously driven by not only industrialization, urbanization, but also now the next wave of the industrial revolution, which is going to be founded on AI. I'm hoping these conversations continue, and we really, really do view that Energy Asia is indeed a useful platform for it. And Dan, anything you want to add?
This is only the second edition of Energy Asia, but it's really quite remarkable to me what's been achieved. 3,000 people, 60 countries represented. It's a great achievement. And it's thought about what Energy Asia, this conference, is about. First of all, it was to make sure that there was a voice of Asia, which there was a strong sense that it was being left out of a lot of the conversations. And the significance, as we heard, about 6.5% growth in Malaysian electricity demand. It's something I heard earlier today, that over the last 20 years, electricity demand really hasn't grown in Europe, and in this part of the world it's tripled. So it's a different perspective, and that perspective was not being heard. Secondly, was to have an Asian focus, an Asian framework for looking at energy issues, not just from a Northwest Europe perspective, which had kind of been dominant of the international discussion. And the third is, of course, the dynamics of energy change, energy transition, and how thinking has changed about energy transition from where it was even a couple of years ago. But as one of the things that the events that unfolding remind us, it's very important to continue to ensure that the energy systems are resilient, because the shocks can be demand, the shocks can be political, the shocks can be weather, but how fundamental, as Tawfiq has said, it is to human civilization.
So I think for the Master Ceremonies, I think we can move to the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Tan Sri, and thank you, Dr. Yee again. We now welcome questions from the floor. We kindly request for members of the media to state your name and organization before asking your question. Yes, we have the gentleman in front, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. Question for Daniel Yakin. So what do you think is the biggest change since your book, The Prize, published? And how has it affected your perspective? Do you expect more divided or fragmented world in both traditional and new energy sector? And for President Tawfik, we know that the energy demand is surging in the AI era, but at the same time, energy transition is urgent. So how to solve the paradox and how to balance the cost and benefits? Thank you so much.
Well, the first thing is I recently reread The Prize because I was writing a new epilogue for it, and I thought it was a pretty good story, actually. I enjoyed reading it. But what I wanted to do with this new epilogue was say, what are the enduring lessons? And I think the enduring lessons are about energy security, the power of supply and demand, the role of innovation. You know, there are 5 or 6 big themes that are relevant today, and I find if you read the book at different times, whatever the issues are, you'll look at them differently because of that. So I think it provides, the prize is not only history, but it's really a window to look at energy change. But with your question, remind me of another book I did called Commanding Heights, about the world moving towards a more globalized world, borders coming down among countries, trade, the incredible growth of supply chains, and we're seeing a reversal of that right now. It is more fragmented. It's still a globalized world, but it's a more fragmented one, and clearly issues of kind of national identity, national politics are affecting these global supply chains, which up until a few years ago were just taken for granted.
Thank you for the question. It's a great one. How do you deal with the clearly growing demand versus energy transition? And Petronas, we've always posited, and as our sincere belief, it's embedded in our statement of purpose, that we need to enrich lives even as we build a sustainable future. So we don't believe the posturing by some that the production of energy to meet these demands need to be destructive or disruptive in the context of economic pursuits. And rightly so, I believe every country in Asia, particularly where there's a wide GDP range from sub $2,000 all the way to $93,000 per capita, there is a right for them to pursue economic development. But as we approach this conundrum right now, we need to have the balance of pursuing growth responsibly and equitably. One of the most telling pieces of the montage you didn't see as part of the opening ceremony was that Asia, having such a large share of global GDP, today with 4.8 billion people, even here as we stand and sit today, 700 million people pursuing economic development, you can't leave people behind. So the challenge for Asia, even as we have abundance, is also inequity. And we need to also make sure, as we develop and pursue and economies thrive, we can't leave segments of society behind. And I believe this is not something that is an either-or situation. We can make sure we responsibly produce as part of an energy transition and a wholesale shift of energy systems while being absolutely responsible. Thank you.
Dr. Yakin can also share insights on AI's influence on energy sector. Thank you.
Oh, he's getting a lot of questions. AI is, first of all, it's created enormous demand for electricity that wasn't there before. And as a result of that, an increased demand for natural gas. I think that's one of the most striking features of the last year and a half. Something we've heard of this conference. I think the other side of it is, of course, still very early days, and Tawfik could certainly address it, which is, although you don't have to address it now, is how AI will change how the energy industry operates. So we're at the beginning on both sides, but there's a real rush now for data centers and to assure the electric power. And one of the things that we're very focused on is what's required for the data centers. And so we're doing work focused on what we call the metal of electrification, which is copper, and ensure that there will be sufficient copper to support the whole data center revolution.
Thank you. Can we have the next question, please?
Mr. Taufik, I have a question for you. So, in a very interesting speech at the conference, you mentioned that Malaysia could become an importer of LNG at some point, and you're prepared for it. So, I would think the underlying assumptions would be that you plan to step up gas production in Malaysia. Could you give us an estimate on how much that's going to increase, and could you also tell us when you expect Malaysia to become an importer of LNG? Thanks.
We already are actually preparing for this scenario, and I think the statistic that was shared yesterday, the 6.5% demand growth in electricity, it is not just us who has to prepare for the onset of this uptick in electricity demand. It was also shared during a recent forum that we had. CEOs of energy players and utilities come in, and the Prime Minister also cited north of 40 billion ringgit being set aside to make sure that the grid is also going to be equipped with the influx of energy demand. We are, and I think this has already been reflected in the government's plans, working to get a third regasification terminal up and running. While we continue to retain an advantage position in East Malaysia to export LNG to our long-term partners and then for their energy security, the needs and demand centers here in the peninsula are indeed growing. We already enjoy the gas supply being able to be robustly sourced not only from our fields offshore east coast of Peninsular Malaysia, but also from our joint development area in Thailand. Roughly the 2 BCFD that has been sent, that's been delivered to reach our coast and also service not only power but also non-power needs is going to be outstripped. And I think, in tandem with the gas reforms, we can expect that in the next 4 or 5 years there's going to be growing dependence on a LNG importation.
Which year and which year, sir?
Within the 4 or 5 years, I think we will.
Thank you for the question. Just a reminder to state your name and organization before asking your question.
Tan Sri Hazard from Berita Harian. So yesterday in your welcoming speech, you mentioned the world face oil crisis. So what are some concerted efforts that you have observed from the talks to mitigate the impacts of the oil crisis on the region's energy transition? And also, second question, what are some key outcomes from the Eagle talks? Could you give us context on where this takes Asia's energy transition? Thank you.
Okay. Just to give color to the second question, I'll answer that. I'll also invite Dan to weigh in on what he's observed at the Eagle Forum. The Eagle Forum, thank you for the question. The Eagle Forum was one that, one effort of ours, this was the inaugural attempt to gather from across sectors, not just from the perspective of oil and gas players, but also energy and utilities. We had representatives from chemicals, we had representatives from hard to abate, but also financial institutions and multilateral bodies sitting in a room thinking about how energy transition has been impacted, particularly by the developments of the last, I want to say 2 months, but I think it's been the last 4 to 5 years. But the outcome, there was one of probably in unison. There was a response that pointed towards enhanced collaboration. But the enhanced collaboration could not be described, I think, that generically, because we need demonstrable outcomes if you were going to work across industry as well as across borders. The ask was to have a place like ASEAN make policy making as well as policy enforcement more coherent and consistent to make projects that would address energy security in this region a little bit more investable. There was also some indications that if we make these projects across phases where investable phases are matched to the right investors and investable packages are matched to the right investors, we could get a better share of the capital for energy transition coming our way. And in this context, I think there has been an agreement to collaborate and have shared best practices in how projects have been parceled elsewhere in the world to make it far more investable, and we've seen some of this in Europe. To answer your first question, and I'll pass it on to Dan to weigh in. When we describe the term oil crisis, it's an internal term by Petronas, and thank you that you picked it up. It's a confluence of tougher reserves to monetize, higher CO2, further out offshore, sometimes working in disputed areas, with an uncertain demand outlook for things that we traditionally have made and expected people to buy. There was a growing realization that energy players need to be a lot more consumer-centric and aware of the requirements. Case in point, I demonstrate perhaps an LNG buyer from our traditional markets is no longer going to be asking only for LNG. They're going to be asking, how do you help me contain the emissions? So you're going to have to deliver this to be something already low carbon, but after that, could you offer me coal combustion solutions? Could you offer me CCS so that I can sequester the CO2? So the ask is no longer one of a simple binary product being offered to a customer who is almost captive to what you produce. You need to listen to legislation, and the operating environment is difficult. And together with that, we are on the onset of having energy system shift towards one that's being more electron-based, with energy systems being more intermittent. You have to prepare for deployments of smarter grids, which is, I can get Dan to comment on that. That's the materials for grids, copper in particular. They're not ready yet, but we are going to have to prepare for those. So as energy players contend with this poly crisis, a lot more has to be done, not only from the perspective of making things investable, setting aside the necessary capital to support such investment, but also having the capabilities to take on the increasing complexities of energy systems as they shift. Dan, I think you maybe want to comment on the...
Yeah, I think the first point is that, as you said, that there's a fundamental need for investment to meet energy needs. And there was discussion around what you need in terms of predictable policies, if there's going to be, and stability in order to provide that, generate that investment. Two other things to me that stood out was one, given you could take your concept of polycrisis and make it an even broader concept, and the need to build resilience into energy systems to be able to deal with everything from increased demand to crises and polycrises, and the contribution of everything from LNG to renewables, and how do they address resilience, and how do you buttress that resilience. And then the other thing, of course, there's been targets, political targets for energy transition going back to the beginning of this decade, but I was really thinking there's been a lot of experience, and people now, with the experience of it, saying what is realistic, what is the timing, as opposed to what might have been thought to be the timing a few years ago. So I thought that was part of this very informed and thoughtful discussion that happened in the group, small enough that you had some real exchange of thoughts in a very constructive fashion.
The next question, please, lady in front.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Amanda Battersby from Upstream. A couple of questions, short ones, if I may, to Tengku Taufik. Firstly, there's, as you mentioned earlier, not only for Malaysia's energy security, but the MLNG, Petronas LNG plant is crucial for energy security in a lot of North Asian countries. As industry regulator, is Petronas happy with the speed at which gas discoveries are being exploited to put feed gas into that project? And secondly, on a wider scale, I understand about 40% of Peninsular Malaysia's power is still fueled by coal. Are there any moves to replace that with gas? Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. I'll deal with the second question first. I think the government has already announced the policy to halve coal capacity, and of course, as much as every other energy mix within the region, you're seeing a range of 70 to 80% of energy systems still being powered by fossil fuels. Of course, from a Peninsular Malaysian perspective, that poses a challenge. Hence, it links to the earlier question where we're going to have to start thinking about more reliance on LNG importation. Insofar as the time frame taken from discovery to first gas, like every other host authority, and I'm not going to disclose which country, I don't want to speak on their behalf. We've been speaking to a lot of our neighbors, and our neighbors have reflected all pretty much the same quandary. The time frame from first making a viable discovery to actually get things developed, they have to run the hurdles of permitting, local requirements, getting standards aligned with their partners within the upstream arrangements, whether they are PSCs or whether they're leasing concessions. But what has been made abundantly clear in all of these conversations with the neighboring host authorities is that for many of them, targets to get to a certain level of production weren't done arbitrarily. They were actually ground up, and they were building blocks driven now, I think possibly going to be further distorted by the onset of AI. I mentioned in my opening address that every country in the region is pursuing its own goals under the fifth industrial revolution, and even as we contend with increased middle classes, urbanization, industrialization, on top of this, the demand's growing. We are, and Petronas has demonstrated this, we are working with contractors who believe give a value add and help shorten this time frame. No host authority is happy with the current time frame. Ideally, 36 to 40 months after discovery, you should be able to plan how the layers add on and extend your plateau production. Insofar as LNG is concerned, Petronas has not spared any effort. We have had a series of discoveries fast-tracked to delivery, not least of all fields such as Jerun last year, Timi, Rosemary, Majorum. And it is only with the collaboration and the concerted efforts of the PACs together with Petronas that we've managed to ensure that the lifeline and the supply visibility for our LNG complex is there.
Thank you very much.
So one thing I would add is that you mentioned permitting, and responsible permitting is a critical element in energy development, ensuring energy supplies. But I would add, across much of the world, permitting is a fundamental challenge for energy development, where it's, I would say, cumbersome permitting. It takes too long and it's too duplicative is a challenge for much of the energy development around the world. I just hear it in country after country. So responsible permitting needs to be done right, but it needs to be done in a timely fashion.
Take the last two questions. Lady on left.
Hi, I'm Erica.
Please give the stadium mic.
Can I just continue with my sorry?
We will go to you next.
I'm Erica from Malaysia Reserve. I just have actually 50 questions, but I just want to get back to Energy Asia. So, what are the some concrete solutions, or such as business agreements to date that you can highlight from Energy Asia, and maybe you can share with us a sense of where Asia is in the energy transition and the key examples that support your take of this transition. Both from both. And okay, sorry. And one more. We're talking about the muted oil price movement despite the escalating Israel-Iran conflict, right? So maybe I just want to know from Petronas' standpoint, what's driving this market very calm? Is the industry underestimating the geopolitical risk, or is there anything else behind it?
Let's try to keep the focus on Energy Asia. But
That's why I'll tackle the last question first before I move the focus to the proof points and the commitments under Energy Asia, which there have been plenty. First off, with oil and gas supply, my remarks indicated that there's been a surge. The rally was actually quite distinct, from 65 to 75 in very short order following the first missile strikes. I'm not going to comment on the geopolitics, but I think the perception that the oil and gas industry is calm. I can't say to you conclusively with the stats, but just anecdotally by behavior, the number of oil and gas leaders we have here who have stepped out every 1 hour to contend with operations and their exposure in the region, I think we're not calm. If anything, it's like that. It's the phenomenon of the duck swimming in water over water. We're furiously paddling. The developments are being watched very, very closely. Petronas, you will remember, also has operations in Iraq. We're in the region. We have staff deployed in Abu Dhabi. This is part of the responsibility that many people don't realize. We take supply for granted. Amin Nasir took pains yesterday, I think, during our session, in his very clear video message. Never underestimate the importance of availability of supply during times of crisis. This is what is going to cause shocks to the system if you think that there's going, and it just underscores Daniel's earlier point around making sure investment is always there to make sure the energy system is resilient. This is probably a test for the industry again. We tend to perpetuate cyclicality by, no, it's okay, it's abundant, let's not spend, and then suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where we're having to recover when demand resurges. Proof points out of Energy Asia. Leading up to Energy Asia, we had the Blue Carbon Collective, where academia, Petronas, gathered together to make Chile, not just from Malaysia, from friends in Brazil as well. Mangroves as part of a larger carbon sequestration, part of a nature-based solution approach. We've had a number of agreements working towards, and I think my contemporary and friend Patrick Mayani mentioned yesterday, as we develop in Malaysia, we're going to try and make this as low cost and low emission as possible. Everything that we've done within the technology agreements, as well as the commitments and strategic cooperations that have been signed in abundance over the course of the last 2 days, works towards the realization of this advantage barrel that Petronas is pursuing, and I think many others are doing the same, producing with more reliance on technology and innovation to make sure low-cost, low-emission barrels can come out of the ground, responsibly produced to power the development for future. But also, our clean energy vehicles continue to support and work with partners such as Marubeni around getting technology to deploy RE faster. So it's not just a single tier, but this is not a trade show just to get more blocks signed, but it's also to address the fuller needs of a more resilient energy system. Maybe then, it almost begs your commentary. Is this fake calm before the storm around?
Well, I mean, there is already a storm on a degree of destruction and kinetic warfare that really had not been anticipated. I think it had been feared, and there was a sense that time was running out as Iran was, the International Atomic Energy Agency had just said it a day before this war began, that Iran was no longer observing their participating in the program. So that was a trigger. What we're seeing in the oil price, at least so far, and it could of course change at any hour, is that there's no, to our knowledge, there's no disruption of supply. So really that's a risk premium in the price, and it's not surprising at all that there would be under these circumstances, given how critical the region is, but there's not a disruption at this point, and supplies continue to flow and to be abundant. But it does go back to the very first question that was asked about the prize. One of my favorite quotes in the book was from Winston Churchill, who had been before World War I, when Britain was shifting its naval fleet from coal to oil. He was asked about relying for oil on, of all places, Persia, Iran, and he said, safety in oil lies in variety and variety alone. In other words, security is diversification, and one of the fundamental ways that you get resilience in an energy system is by having it diversified. And that was a message in 1912, and it's a message in 2025.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that was the last question.
Sorry,
Okay.
one last question.
Okay, one last question.
Thank you so much. So my question is for Petronas.
Who are you?
Sorry, I'm from S&P Global Commodity Insights. My name is Abby. My question is for Petronas, actually. This morning we heard the finance minister said there's plan to introduce a carbon tax by 2026, but it needs to be coordinated with the subsidies to the energy sector. I want to get Petronas' assessment and stance regarding the carbon tax. Thank you.
Please don't make me go against a minister in my own home country. I think let's be let's be very clear here. I think the finance minister has indeed indicated as part of the government's reforms through price discovery, energy efficiency, energy subsidies, which even at the Eagle Forum has been related by so many counterparts from so many regions. Subsidies aren't sustainable, and subsidies do not power transitions. So insofar as resource allocation is an issue, subsidies distort supply and demand. From the perspective of the government's move to rationalize subsidies, I of course will defer to the official announcements, but we believe that the government is targeting how to do this to make sure that those most at risk get least affected. That's the commentary on targeted subsidies. Insofar as carbon taxes, you know the region is moving to price in externalities. I think there has been discussions as to how to get carbon pricing and carbon taxes a little bit more uniformly done. Interestingly, one of the factors that was raised during the eco discussions was that once these costs of externalities are a little bit more harmonized, a little bit more transparent, and a little bit more liquid, we can get to a point where economics of undertakings get a little bit more conscious around how to plan for and basically incorporate carbon taxes and carbon pricing in assessing feasibility. Then you do either mitigation, which helps propagate a new revenue stream potentially for people like Petronas, i.e. CCS. You would avoid paying carbon taxes if you can be offered a sequestering solution which is viable and cheaper. But at the end of the day, you can see that the Malaysian government is, much like its contemporaries in the region, fully cognizant of the impacts of climate change. And while it cares for the welfare of the society, it cannot also ignore the real crisis we're facing as a planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Thank you, Dr. Yagin. And ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the press conference session. Thank you for your active